Hello everyone. In this video series I want to talk a little bit about the different aspects of developing video games for the Playdate. I have made two video games for the system myself, Magic Castle and the Fall of Magic Castle. Both of them are quite different in terms of how they were made. Both of them used slightly different approaches to game design. There were different expectations associated with both of those games, and I wanted to make this video series because I thought that if you're interested in creating your first video game, there's always a ton of questions surrounding it. I think that every experience of creating a video game is useful and can be used as a good source of inspiration or just information. So this is what I'm aiming for here. And for the first video, I wanted to talk specifically about choosing the right engine for your first game. We're talking specifically about Playdate, so we've got two choices here. We've got the Pulp web-based game editor, as the authors call it, and we also have the Playdate SDK. And my first game, Magic Castle, was made with the Pulp engine. The reason was the sheer simplicity of the engine itself. When you first boot up the editor, you are presented with quite a simple UI, I would say. Especially compared to something like Unity, where there's just a million of options to choose from. So I thought, one of my first thoughts when I saw Pulp was that, oh, this is quite inviting. I can do something almost immediately, and I haven't done any of this. This is immediately made. This is like a template or like a boilerplate game made by the Pulp team. If you hit play, you are immediately transported to the simulator screen where you can test how this game works, and that's the immediate benefit of using something like Pulp. You can see all of the graphical elements which the game is made of. They're called tiles, and those tiles are split into different layers. So we've got the player tile, which is like a specific tile that has some extra abilities, like it can walk, it can detect that it's bumping into something or interacting with something. You've got your sprites that can be interacted with. You've got your items that can be collected, like the discs here. When I go over them, they're immediately collected, and some behavior can be specified for how those floppy disks interact with you. And there's also the world tiles, which is mostly the background of your level. So with this you can already start creating quite fast. Creating new tiles is very easy. The Playdate system has a black and white screen, so obviously we're just dealing with with very simple tiles here. No colors. The only technique that might add some depth to your images on screen might be dithering, which is a technique that simulates shades of gray by tricking our eyes, basically. But when you're starting things out, those things don't matter too much. You just want to do something, create something, and this is why Pulp is pretty great. You can almost immediately create a very, very simple game based on the example that you're given. You can export that game either as a JSON file, which you can later on import, which is good if you want to have like multiple versions of the game if you're testing things out and whatnot. And you can also download the PDX, which allows you to then sideload that file onto your Playdate console if you have it, and if you don't have it, you can just also run it in the simulator that we saw here. So all in all, the first impressions of using Pulp are very positive. But the question is, can you make a real game out of it, right? Can you make something that will be presentable, something that people would want to play, something that you want to show not just to your immediate friends and colleagues and family and whatnot, but also to the whole outside world? And I would say yes, it is. There are quite a few games made with Pulp, and I think that it makes a lot of sense to visit the store, the Playdate store, and there should be like a category called made for Pulp or something like that. Let's see if they still have it, or maybe it's hidden right now. Oh yeah, maybe it's in the collections section. So there should be something around here, published by Panic. Pulp hits. All right. Yeah. So just browsing through the games that you see on the screen, checking the videos, checking the miniatures, might immediately give you a good idea of what kind of game you can make with this engine. And I think before you make the decision, it's good to do some browsing. It's good to do some research beforehand. So my favorite Pulp game was Island. I think it's quite ingenious how it uses the engine, how it bends the engine into its own will and creative direction. So you might find some good inspiration and some good reference points just by browsing through this section right here. So when I was creating my game, I noticed maybe halfway through the development took a couple of months. I would say like 4 to 6 months. It's hard to calculate because it's not like I was sitting 8 hours every day like on a full-time job contract with it. It was mostly afternoons, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But let's for the sake of argument, let's say that it was 6 months of development of the first game. So somewhere along the way, I would say at the 30% mark or something like that, I noticed that Pulp doesn't scale that well. It was quite apparent that the more stuff you put into it, and this is the game, by the way, this is the game that I've made in Pulp. I've noticed at some point that the more stuff you put into it, the more levels you put into it, the more sprites and items and all of that, it will slow down the the compilation time of the engine. So when you want to just make a tiny little change and then save your change, it can take for up to even 10 seconds or something like that. So it becomes quite annoying at some point because you feel like the whole engine is just chugging along and just trying to keep up with you. The more sprites you put in, the more graphical elements you have in the game, the slower the engine becomes. There are some techniques to optimize it a little bit, but I'm not gonna cover this right now. So basically, my biggest issue with working with Pulp was that at some point the project is barely manageable, I would say. Pulp is not just dragging and dropping elements. It's not just about putting stuff on the screen and just drawing stuff around like you see here. There's a lot of drawn elements, but honestly a lot of them were drawn somewhere else and then imported into the engine so that I don't have to painstakingly just draw them here pixel by pixel. So it's not just that, it's not just the graphical elements, it's also the logic, because Pulp is not just a graphical tile engine system. It also has a scripting language called Pulp Script, and Pulp Script is from what I know, it's based on Lua, the Lua coding engine, but it's a very stripped down basic version of that programming language. So again, it's a very good starting point for aspiring programmers, for somebody who has never programmed before, or for someone who just wants to do something simple in their spare time, doesn't want to devote too much time into it, just want to play around. Pulp script is great for that because it basically extends the very basic functionality that Pulp gives us. So at some point you might think that you don't want to just bump into objects and then see a message like it is in the test example, where you just move around, you go somewhere, you see a bit of text, you cannot exit the room because there's like a solid tile. The black tile is a solid tile. There's a very simple interaction, but maybe you want more. Maybe you want things to move on the screen. Maybe you want some logic. Maybe you want some combat systems, numbers floating around. Maybe you want all of that stuff. So yes, all of this is possible in Pulp, but only to an extent, because like I said, it's a simple language that doesn't. It's a simple engine that doesn't scale very well. So sooner than later, you will face the issue of not being able to do certain things, especially if you're the kind of a person who wants to, keep iterating over an idea as you develop the game. Let's say that you've been working on the game mechanics, everything is working fine in Pulp, you're satisfied, and suddenly you have this idea, it would be nice to have a real life sound of a hit or of a gunshot effect or whatever, and you want to just import an MP3 file because that's the fastest way to do those kinds of things, to just find a bank of sounds and then put something in your game, especially if it's a natural sounding sound, like birds, common physical effects, water splashing, stuff like that. And then you're faced with the limitation that you can have songs and sounds in your Pulp engine, but you cannot have MP3s. You cannot have real life sound. You can only do stuff that is included, which is just chiptune music. And if you're not a musician, if you don't have any kind of musical background, it can be very, very difficult to create something that will pass as a sound effect or as a music score or whatever you want to do. It will be much more difficult than just importing an MP3 or a WAV file or whatever you buy on the internet. So in this case, it's really, really good to just again browse through the available games on Pulp, see what's possible, see what you can do, play some of those games, play around with the engine itself, and if it fits your vision, if it fits your idea, then great, then fantastic, go for it, because then you will have a lot of things already there for you. So it will be quite easy up to a certain point. It will be quite easy to add stuff, to add graphical assets. Up to a certain point, it's going to be easy to create additional logic. Thankfully, the logic can be split into like separate logic containers where every single file has its own logic associated with it. So like in Magic Castle, I've got a separate script for the player, how he's supposed to look like, how he's supposed to move, what he is supposed to do at certain parts and modes of the game. And then I've got like a separate file for the game itself, like for the settings, for all of the most important config stats, stuff that starts at the beginning of the game, like how much HP an enemy has, and all sorts of things are just categorized and split into specific chunks of code, which is good, but at the same time it brings me to the other caveat that if you have a lot of code, and at certain points I started having lots of code, you can split it further, but still you will deal with either lots of files on the right side that you cannot organize in folders. There's no such thing as as organizing folders here, or like a more involved file structure. So you end up with lots, if you have a game that's based on a lot of code and a lot of logic, you end up with those long walls of code that you have to manage, that you have to use thoughtfully. Finding something can become an issue. Even using the included search bar, it can still be quite difficult to find certain things. So all in all, I think that Pulp is a good engine. It's a good starting point for newcomers, for beginners, for people who don't want to spend too much time creating a simple top-down game. If you want to create a very simple score chaser or something like that, sure, play around with Pulp, see if it does what you want it to do. There's a lot of also posts on the Playdate dev forum about how Pulp works and how you can bend it towards specific scenarios. So I guess doing your homework in that case is very, very useful, and I would really recommend spending some time with the engine before you make the decision that, all right, I want to make a game in that engine. And it doesn't have to take that long. I think that within a couple of hours of research plus playing around, you might get a pretty good idea whether or not you want to commit more time into this specific engine. So we've got Pulp. And now we've also have the second option, which is the SDK. And yes, the SDK is much more involved, because suddenly you're not dealing with graphical, nice visual elements. Suddenly the game starts looking like this. It's just it's just a bunch of text, and that's it. And that's what you're gonna stare at for the next few months if you decide to go for it. So I guess that for people who have already made video games or want to have a video game that allows them to do a lot of things, or want to have better resolution or more control, or the FPS, the frames per second, you want to download better assets, you want to find real life music, like those MP3 files that I mentioned, or the WAV files, you can convert them to a format that is going to play nicely with the Playdate, and then you can have real life music in your game. So in terms of what you can do graphically, audiovisually in general with the SDK, the sky is the limit. And the 16 megabytes of RAM on your Playdate, that's also a limit, which I'll talk about in a second. But basically, with the SDK, you suddenly enter the realm of more professional game development, like instantaneously, because you're not dealing with a graphical system anymore that has its own limitations. Suddenly you can you can play test different versions of the game very easily. You have access to much more information about the system, because running the game, this time the game runs in a separate simulator, in a simulator that allows you to have access to the console, you have access to the accelerometer and the crank. You can even check the memory. You can even check how much memory your game currently is using, which is very, very handy, especially if you start closing to the limit. So there's just a lot of things that the SDK gives you. You want to make a top-down Zelda-like game with the SDK, no problem. You want to make a Doom-like clone, sure, go ahead. Those games were made in the SDK. So that also comes with its own documentation, that comes with its own links and a dev forum and lots of videos. I mean, all of that is also available for Pulp, obviously, but I think that just judging by the amount of games that came out, I think that at least on catalog, most games were made with the SDK. I might be wrong here, but it just feels, looking at the different games that come out, it really does feel like most of them were made with the SDK. So you might find even more knowledge about the SDK, hints and tips and hacks and whatever. I think there's just more knowledge to be found when it comes to the SDK in general. And with the SDK, all of that freedom, all of that functionality that suddenly you have access to, all of that is really, really great, but it also comes at a price, and I would say that that price is time. If you want to make a video game in the SDK, then unless you found a framework, unless you found snippets and bits of code, or you're working in a higher team, you're going to have to do everything yourself. It's not like in Pulp, where you already can, out of the box, move your character, bump into things, have a chat window where text is showing up nicely and it paginates and whatnot. You don't have any of that here. You just have functions, and you have specific functions of the SDK that you have to read quite thoroughly to understand what you can do and what you cannot do. There's a whole documentation here where you can find a lot of information about how to draw objects on the screen, how to deal with geometry, like how to make a line, how to make a polygon, what's a rectangle, how to deal with them, how to create a sprite, how to move a sprite. So all of those things are not they're not as easy as with Pulp. I mean, you can do a lot of more things, but it does feel like, especially when I was doing the second game, it did feel like I have to come up with certain systems from scratch. Maybe I didn't do my research. Maybe there are some helper functions out there that might help me out a little bit. I still did use a couple of them, like in the I do import quite a lot of helper libraries. Like I used LTDK to create my levels. I used animated sprites so that my sprites, the characters on the screen, can are a bit easier to organize in terms of, hey, you should look like this when you're idle, you should look like this when you walk left, you should look like this when you're attacking someone. I used panels for the comic-like panel style, scrolling. So there were some helper libraries that really sped up my development of the game. But again, research, much more research than for Pulp actually. And like I said, I don't think I did enough of it. And just a lot of things that you'll have to come up on your own. Because, for example, if you want to have a chat system, like a dialogue system where you approach, let's say that you want to approach a character and then talk to the character, and then the character will display a dialogue box, on top of him. So first of all, a basic game when you just start, there's nothing. You have to start from scratch or from a pre-made example that you can find somewhere. Even in the SDK folder, there are some examples made by Panic themselves. I thoroughly recommend going through every one of those examples. But moving your character is a thing that you have to code. Interacting with another character, so basically like colliding with another thing on the screen, and your code knowing that you're colliding with another thing on the screen, that's also something that you have to code yourself. There is a function to draw text on the screen, but it's not like you just type text and the text shows up on the screen, and then if there's too much text, it's gonna magically move to the next. No, nothing like that. You just have to do all of those things yourself, and that's why it's. To be honest, I thought that my second game would take much less time. I think I thought that it would take like half of what it actually did. I've spent over a year developing the game, and that was mostly my mistake of not realizing that every single thing has to be coded in. There are no shortcuts. There are no ways of like magically creating a dialogue system out of thin air. Looking through the dev forums was very useful. Looking through some of the videos was very useful. But at the end of the day, certain elements you just have to think about them yourself, and you have to make them yourself, and you have to play test them yourself, and you have to iterate over them yourself. So it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. It is very time consuming. That I can always promise, that making a game in the SDK is going to be very time consuming. Even stuff like, how do I organize you know, the game, like where do I start, what do I do first. In Pulp, you have like already some of those questions are already answered for you. You can already move your character, you can already, you know, pick up objects and whatnot. Here you just have a canvas, and you have like a whole toolbox of things that you can do on that canvas, but you know, the first step is up to you. You're the person who's going to make the first step, and you're going to have to find you know, a good maintainable way of developing the game. Otherwise you might get either very, very stuck at the very beginning, or it just, you know, your dream game might not be you know, the game that you want to make at the very beginning might not be possible at that level. So for me, the answer on how to tackle this was to do a couple of mini games first, you know, and then I incorporated those mini games into the main game, into the sequel, into the Fall of Magic Castle. I wanted to do a couple of mini games because they allowed me to just focus on one thing at a time, and then they were woven into, you know, the main gameplay loop. So that was my way of breaking into like something a bit more serious. But you know, for other people, I saw this advice a couple of times already, that it's good to just start small, to just start with something like very, very simple, something that was made already even. However, I don't find that interesting to just create you know, a carbon copy of another game that already exists, like a, I don't know, like a Breakout game or a Pac-Man game. That game already exists, so there's like nothing to, for me, nothing to be excited about. But you know, this does work very, very well, and most tutorials are based on some sort of a very basic kind of game, score chaser, something that will get your feet wet quickly, but also expose you to various different topics. So you know, to summarize a little bit, I think that both engines are a very, very solid choice. I would say that, you know, it really does matter where you're coming from in this case. If you're somebody who just never had anything to do with game development, and you just want to start, want to do something, want to create something fast, and you don't want to spend too much time coding, or you want to do that but at a later date, you just want to, you know, test things out, then go with Pulp. Pulp is gonna, you know, answer all of your questions, and you're gonna see quite quickly if it's something that you want to do or not. If you're a bit more experienced, if you've done something else with coding, but you've never touched video games, that's my case, by the way. I work as a web developer. I had nothing to do with game dev, so for me it still made sense to start with Pulp. However, I you know, it would not be that difficult to just jump straight into the SDK, but it still didn't feel like a right move for me. But for you it might be different. If you've already been coding at least a little bit, and you feel that you want to start with something that's a bit more involved, then I would definitely go with the SDK. You just have to remember that Pulp is limited, but it will, be kind to your time, and it will provide you with something quite quickly, but it will be limited in what it can do. And with the SDK, you can do whatever the hell you want, but you do have to invest quite a lot of time into doing that thing. So just keep your expectations in check, and you'll be good. And it's always good to do some research beforehand, ask the community, talk with some people who already done this. I've got this X idea of a game. How would I start? Sometimes a simple conversation like that can be really, really, really helpful. So that's it for today's video. I hope it's useful, and I'll see you in the next one.